Hello. Hi, everybody. So we're going to get started. So we stay on track, on time. So I'd like to introduce Jeff McAffer. He's been working 25 years in. I'm not going to read your own bio. No. So anyway, he's he's the director of Open Source Program Office at Microsoft. He has been working with us at the advisory board for quite a time now, and helped provide guidance on to how to scale open source within your organization, ensure compliance. And so I'll give you the mic.
Great,
thanks.
I'm Jeff McAffer. I work at Microsoft and helping run the open source programs office there. Some of you may have noticed we've shifted a little bit from not so open to being a little more open. And that's been quite an interesting journey. I sense that there's, looking at some of the sessions that I've been in so far today, kind of noticed a lot of the same kinds of thinking going on here that, frankly, we had maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, perhaps without some of the earlier issues. So lots of times when I talk about Microsoft and doing open source, people first start, well, why open source? So how many people here already know why, right? Or you're doing open source now, and okay, so you're all. I'm preaching to the converted. Is that what's happening? Okay, that's awesome. People look at Microsoft and say, well, why now? Why are you doing open source? What are you looking to get out of it? And there's a whole bunch of things, but fundamentally, for me at least, it comes down to this. It's not really enough to aspire to be world class when everybody else starts there. The way of doing code at Microsoft and products at Microsoft in the sort of distant past was we started from a blank hard drive. It's like, hey, let's write an editor. Okay, blank hard drive, and we'd go and do, we'd write Word, right? And then, hey, let's do an operating system. It would start from a blank disk and do, and it's, it's crazy because everybody else starts there. When we go and acquire a company, right? Buying a company is like 95% open source. They've added 5% of magic on top, built a whole customer base or ecosystem or whatever it is, all their value on top of like 95% of it being open source. And you can look at that the same way in the government. Like you're trying to satisfy some customer, some user in your community, and your secret sauce is not yet another windowing framework or yet another database tool or something. Your secret sauce is delivering the value to the citizens or your customers in the other rest of the company. So really open source for us allows us to focus on where our value is. What is it that compels people to take our offering over somebody else's, okay? And so with that, we sort of went all in. About 7 years ago, we started this shift, and then over the past few years, you've seen it gaining momentum and steam, and we're like that big oil tanker, and it takes a lot to get it turned. But oh my gosh, once you get it turned, it's really going. So that's kind of, we're getting it turned right now. And we're engaging in open source communities and projects really at scale. And when I look at the government of Canada, with the number of people, the number of departments and that, I see a lot of analogies with Microsoft. How many I didn't put it in here because it's controversial, but how many people have seen the cartoon with all the different Microsoft entities all pointing guns at one another? It's the org chart. Right? And the org chart has like Windows and Office and stuff, and everybody's pointing a gun at each other. That was the old world, right? And so lots of silos, lots of independent work, duplicative work, lots of politics and that sort of thing. And as we've gone forward in this, we've really been building this culture of collaboration, and I'll talk about that sort of towards the end. So at scale, just to give you lots of ways to engage with open source. You can integrate open source into your offerings. You can contribute to open source. You can release your own projects into open source. And there's lots of reasons to do that, right? It might be that you're going to build on some ecosystem. So you're going to do a web UI on React, and you're going to leverage all of the different things that are going on in the React community. You don't have to build yet another menu or Expando box or whatever. There's like 20 of them on npmjs.com. You can get your stuff out faster, go cross-platform, all of those other things. And you'll notice a trend here with recruiting and retention across all three of these. It's actually a really big deal. I mean, you don't do open source so that you can recruit and retain people. That's a byproduct, but it's a huge value. People coming into Microsoft or into the government, if you've got your own siloed set of tools and infrastructure, people come in, they learn that stuff. And then they go, like there's nowhere else they can go because it's all local to your organization. They can't take that learning and go and work it somewhere else, nor can you leverage the learnings that they have somewhere else. If you do your own windowing system and you can't hire people who already know that, you have to train them when you come in. So recruiting and retention is actually a big deal across this whole spectrum. Not a lot of people talk about that all the time, but it's a benefit, not a motivation. Contributing, if you make a fork and fix a bug and then you don't contribute that back up to the original project, now you've got to maintain that fork forever. So good luck, right? It's have fun with that. And another element of contributing is it starts to give you influence, right? People see you showing up. Like you're showing up for real. You're present. You're there. You're contributing code, ideas, issues, commenting on issues, helping other people. And it's not just doc. Not just code. It's doc as well, right? Or participation, sponsoring events, that sort of stuff. And that gives you a lot of credibility in the community. And then sometime when you need something, you need some help with something, there are people who are going to be there because you were there for them. And it even happens in adjacent communities. People start knowing, oh yeah, those guys from Government of Canada, they showed up over here. I mean, they're pretty cool. If I help them over here, they're going to show up here too because they showed up there. And so you get that sort of reputation and halo effect. And releasing open source is one of the challenging things, one of the more challenging things, because you have to really understand why you're doing it. Why release your code as open source? There are lots of values in doing it, and there's lots and lots of ways to do it wrong. So you pay a lot of attention when you're releasing and doing it very mindfully and very thoughtfully. So just for a bit of scale, just so you understand what we're talking about, a bit of an eye chart with some numbers. Right now, we have about 1.5 million different uses of open source across the company. That's individual uses. So we have some components that are used in 5,000-10,000 places. And that's like about 100,000 different unique components being consumed into the company and across thousands of teams. So you think about trying to manage that, right? You can't do anything human at that point. It's all got to be automated. And this is a theme I will repeat over and over throughout the next 20 minutes or so, is the automation is your friend. Because none of these numbers lend itself to a human doing some action to cause approval or whatever. And then in terms of releasing things, we've got about 18,000, all up we've probably got 60,000 developers, and about 18,000 of them right now have explicitly told us what their GitHub ID is and matched it up with their Microsoft identity. So we can track them on GitHub and we know what they're doing and attribute what their contributions to being Microsoft things, stuff like that. And that's, in terms of what we've released, about 8,500 public repositories on GitHub. And thousands of different people coming and collaborating on those. And of course, we collaborate in many open source communities, not Microsoft stuff, right? So that's like sense of scale. So that kind of leads into like, wow, that's a lot, right? And thinking about the kinds of things that to drive that, like policy and process. And this guy here, he's looking really skeptical at all of this. He's thinking, holy crap, that's a big list. Right, and it is, and these are all the sorts, and it purposely sort of drifts off the end here. There's way more down here in the list, and these are the kinds of things you need to think about and have processes and policies for, and you do that because at scale, if you don't, then there's going to be a lot of friction and a lot of variability. There's going to be a lot of variation between what your department does and what my department does, and then we can't talk because it's really easy for you to release stuff, but I can't work on anything. So you need that consistency and coherence across the organization, the larger organization, to actually make it possible to collaborate. If you're not all got the same expectations, then you're not going to be able to collaborate well. I'm not going to go through this list. It's, there's a lot of stuff there, right? I don't know if there's anything. So security is a big thing, right? Obviously, security and privacy are two major topics, and those ones are very challenging. Licensing, things like all your GitHub presence and that. Now the Government of Canada is on GitHub, right? Like I saw, and so do you normally work on GitHub at all, or is it just kind of where you go to get some stuff? Both? Okay. Well, that's good. So when you're releasing things on GitHub, there's lots of policies about two-factor authentication, what's your security, who can put stuff there, all of that sort of thing. Let's see, what else is interesting here? Oh yeah, your GitHub repos and private repos, so we have a big problem, that 8,500 number. We've got like double that in private repos that aren't supposed to be there, right? There are people who go out, just rogue employees. In the earlier discussion downstairs, the idea of going rogue came up, and it might have been in the unconference session. The idea of going rogue and just doing things and asking forgiveness later. I fully support that, except for when you make private repos on GitHub. Don't do that. So there's these things that you've got to pay attention to, and paying attention to them earlier rather than later is very beneficial. And this is a lot of different things. It can be daunting, and you can get a lot of people saying, well, you shouldn't do that because this is too hard, and then, well, what about that policy? You're not going to be able to do X or Y. And that comes back to the, asking forgiveness later and instead of asking permission ahead of time. So you need to basically is engaging thoughtfully. If your manager or your manager's manager or whatever comes up to you and says, why did you do that? If you have actually a thoughtful answer, you might be wrong, but you still thought about it. You weren't just negligent, right? And so this is kind of a philosophy that we've been undertaking and trying to allow people, the saying running with scissors, right? So we don't want people running with pointy scissors, because they'll really hurt themselves. But you can run with those safety scissors, the kids' ones. So you can run with safety scissors because you're thinking about it, right? You knew that you could get hurt. And as we go through this, we've kind of gone through a number of stages of maturity in our open source engagement. And there's actually in the slides, which will be posted someplace, there's actually an expanded definition of these maturity levels. But we started out at level 0, where we were denying open source. And this is in the bad old days of, I hate repeating it, so I'm not going to, of various people, senior at the company, saying things that were crazy. But clearly the company was in denial, right? And some of you may associate or relate to this in terms of your organization. Just like, open source is terrible, why are you even doing that? It's horrible, you're going to get fired if you do that. All of these bad things, right? It's not for us. Somehow we're special. That's my favorite one. We're special. We can't do that open source thing. So we got over that, and through called 1A and 1B, as we went along, this is probably, I'm going to say 7 years ago, we started thinking, this open source thing, it's actually okay. We could maybe do that. I mean, we'll tolerate it, and little pockets of the company would do some open source. And we had some open source before that, like quite some time before, but I'm talking like at scale, at larger scale. So some parts of the company saw tolerant, and that would be okay. And we even got to the point where we sequestered a set of people. We said, here's 60 people. You guys go off and do open source for Microsoft. Right? We made a separate company, and we put them all in a special building. And I'm serious, we did. And those guys, they were all in. They just went crazy, and it was amazingly fun, and it was a good time. But there was a lot of sort of hype-driven open source. It wasn't really durable. We're going to go and do this thing, and it's really cool, and all the other cool kids are doing it, so we're going to do it too. And at that point, it was a good experiment, but it wasn't durable, right? It wasn't sustainable because the business reasons behind it, the actual value that the organization was going to get out of it, wasn't explicit, it wasn't there, it wasn't recognized. Right? So that's a real lesson, I think, for you all to figure out what's the value that open source is going to bring to my organization, or your organization, and how am I going to express that to the powers that be, and have it be a durable thing, so that when you show up at an open source project, or you release some open source, it's there for a while. People can trust in it, people can trust in you. So we sort of got through these sort of early phases, and I'd say that more or less we're at about proficient across the company, if I looked at us as a whole. There are certainly parts of the company that are more fluent, and they're all in on open source, and they've got whole teams of people who are releasing and managing open source and everything. But as a whole right now, I think we're being proficient. It's widespread, it's automated, we've got good policies that are smooth and relatively friction-free. It's generally going along pretty well. We aspire to be further along this path, and we're getting there, but it's a big organization. So a thing for you is to look at at the very end of the slide deck, each one of these is expanded. This is not like gospel canonical truth. Take it for what it is. But look at your organization and try to imagine where you fit in, and then think about what steps you can take to get from wherever you are now to wherever you want to be going forward. And there's no right answer. Like, this is not the gold standard. This is, you don't need to get to mastery, right? That's not everybody needs to be there. It depends on your business goals. It can be totally cool to be here at Proficient. I don't recommend these ones, just to be clear, right? You see a lot of people. It's interesting to go around when I meet people who have my job at other companies, and I ask them, who do you report to, right? What's your reporting chain? I report up through engineering. So my manager is going to be the CEO of GitHub, right? So we're strongly and clearly in engineering side of things. But other people, I've seen open source programs offices in HR, in marketing, in finance, in legal, under the CTO, which is kind of cool. That's sort of more technical. So that, engineering, that's great. But it speaks volumes to me as to how the organization thinks about open source. Where did they position the open source program, right? Where did they put that? And so anyway, people who are up here tend to have the open source program in a non-technical area of the company because it's there for other reasons. So I talked a little bit about this already. I'm not going to go into too much detail. Except again to talk about automation, right? At scale, you really have to go after your automation. Global consistency, but local control, right? People need the autonomy to run with the scissors, but the safety of having them rounded off a little bit, right? So that they're not going to really hurt themselves. They might get a cut, but they're not going to lose an eye. And it's all about enablement, not constraint, and guidelines and not rules. So again, giving the people that freedom. And sometimes people talk about removing all friction. It's actually, you need some friction in some places. You need it where you need it, but you want to get rid of it where you don't. So if I go back to those numbers, and we have 1 million uses of open source in the company, if you had a policy that said each use needs to be reviewed by a human, you would never get there. And we used to have that policy. When I started this team, we used to have a policy that you had to answer 25 skill testing questions to use any piece of open source, for every piece of open source, right? And nobody actually knew what the answers to the questions or what the meaning of the questions were. There were literally questions on there that nobody, with the lawyers, the devs, nobody understood what the question was. So we went through and started removing, and over time got it down to the point where 99.75% of that 1 million uses are automatically approved. We've got the business logic, the data, everything there, so it just flows through. Dev says, I want to use this. Actually, the dev doesn't even say they want to use this. They just start using it. The system detects that you're using it, runs it through automated business logic, and tells you nothing 99.75% of the time. The 0.25% of the time, you get a thing saying, hey, we just noticed you're using this thing. We have some additional questions for you, and you have to go fill out some questions, and then a human looks at the questions and that sort of thing. So it's getting to that level where it's just 99% of the time automated. But then if you're going to release things, it's a little riskier, right? You're giving away IP, you're putting it out there, are you building a community? What's your process going to be for taking input and contributions? You actually want a bit of friction there because you want teams to think about what it is they're doing and have a plan. It's not that we're going to tell them what the plan should be or there's necessarily one right plan or one wrong plan. It's that you have a plan that's the important thing. So you need a little bit of friction in some places, but sort of do it intentionally. So I talked a little bit about where we are in the company, and I just wanted to sort of lay out the picture. So I'm in the open source programs office, and we have basically act as a focal point for an array of different aspects of the company, everything from legal to HR and security and so forth, accessibility folks. And then I have a board of directors. I think of them as a board of directors, the executive council. So these are like CVPs, corporate vice presidents from across the company who act as the guides for my team and help us as sounding board for new policies and approaches, help deal with company and business challenges, and basically give us that guidance like a board of directors would do. And then underneath that, also we work a lot with industry peers, but more importantly, we collaborate. We collaborate, so we're peer to the actual product engineering teams, and they are the ones who interact with the open source programs, like the open source projects. Sorry if that's me who's beeping. They interact with the communities and the collaborators and their customers. They know their customers. I can't walk up to a team in Windows and tell them what they're supposed to do and how they should engage with an open source community, because I don't know what their business is. Right? Their business has a whole bunch of different motivators, different values they're trying to deliver, and they know that. But I can help them, the Open Source Programs Office can help them understand how to do that. Like, what are the structures you can put in place? What are the challenges? What are some approaches that work? That sort of thing. So we sort of act as this middle, like all of these, the 25 skill testing questions, those all came from the legal folks who don't really understand engineering, and they were put in a bad position. Like, don't put your lawyers in this position of having to answer engineering questions. They don't like it. And the devs don't like it either, right? Because they get these wacky questions they don't understand. And the lawyers get upset because the devs aren't doing what they thought they should. So we act as that sort of middle ground mapping or blue layer between the non-technical side of things and the highly technical side, because we understand both viewpoints. So I told you I was going to talk about automation. I'm going to still talk about automation and reducing friction. So we went through this iterative process of eliminating basically everything, every bit of friction. We asked why. And then we asked why some more times until we got down to a core reason or no reason at all. If there was no reason, then we just removed whatever policy or process or tool was in the way. If there was a reason, then we started thinking, is that reason important? Do we really care? Does it really matter? Are we really going to get in trouble? That kind of stuff. And if we didn't, then we'd eliminate it. So those 25 questions, we're down to 5. 5 pieces of information we need. Many of them are automated or can be automated through automated detection. So with those policies, by paring them down, you design them explicitly so they can be automated. Don't design a policy or a process that requires a human to do something, because you can't automate that. So with the automation and policies that are automatable, right, then you need tools that actually do the automation and data that feeds into that. So as an example, with those million different uses of 100,000 different components, if we don't have good licensing data or good security data about those components, we can't run an automated tool that will validate whether or not that's a good thing for you to be doing. So you need that quality data to feed into it if you're actually going to do this in an automated way. And finally, if we can't automate, so this is our mantra, we literally walk around saying, okay, can we eliminate that? No. Can we automate that? No. Then can we delegate it out? Can we enable you, the team, the engineering teams, to do the thing, to make the decision, right? Or can we allow your management to make the decision, right? So really enable them by giving the teams the information they would need to make the decision, right? We're not going to make it for you. We're going to enable you to make it. And give them the backing so they can actually, how to talk about the problem, frame the conversation for them. A little bit more motherhood and apple pie, but tool early and tool often, like just tools, again, automation, right? So tools that detect open source, that track it, figure out the vulnerabilities in it, manage the IP, report it out, because there's nothing worse than having a million people doing stuff and not knowing about it. Right, because that's really a horrible situation to be in, and managing things like GitHub, get ahead of that one. Right, if your teams are all out creating their own GitHub orgs and creating loads of repos, doing random things, that's just going to come back to bite you. Seriously, it took us 6 months to turn on 2-factor authentication for all of our organizations. We still don't even know what all of our organizations are. We have about 100 on GitHub that we know about. But we figure there's probably 1,000. We probably only know about 10%, right? And we sort of go and ask the GitHub guys. They're really great about maintaining privacy and everything. We say, please, please, please tell us all the orgs that have somebody who owns them with @microsoft.com addresses, right? So that we can figure out where all of our, because they just go with a credit card, right, and buy an org and start paying for it, and and then they start putting Microsoft IP on there, right? And then they're like, we don't know, is that managed or not? Is it secure? Is two-factor auth on? All these things. So a little tiny bit of forethought there can really help. Okay, tools, automation, all that stuff's that's great. But culture will eat tools any day of the week, right? You can tool the heck out of any problem or out of a bunch of problems, but if the culture's not there, if you haven't got people that, wanting to collaborate, seeing the value in collaborating, they won't use the tools. They'll go around the tools. They'll figure out something else. So you need that culture, or they'll refuse to do the thing that you needed the tool for, right? So culture is a huge deal. And it's sort of how you build that culture comes sort of multi-directional, right? It's this funny thing where all the cool kids out of school, okay. So all the cool kids out of school, they get it, right? They've been doing open source at school and everything. And the CTOs and the CIOs, they get it because they've read the magazine on the airplane. But all the people in the middle, it's called like the frozen middle, right? So I'm trying to scan to see if there are middle managers here. Sorry. Middle managers are often the problem, right? They're sort of like, because they're senior enough to have lots of control and lots of stuff going on, but they have been beaten down enough by the demands of delivering value to the customer or driving the bug counts down or whatever it is, that they're super hyper focused on getting it done. Right? And so when you come and you say, you know what, you're going to take some spare time and you're going to go and do this thing for somebody else. And they're like, what? No, I don't think so. So that's the challenge. So we've gone through a number of things here. From the top, so Satya Nadella, that's our illustrious CEO, awesome guy. And in 2014, he made this statement that everybody in the company should go and inner source. That's doing open source inside the company, right? So inside the walls and that. And that's awesome. Like, and you see that we've tooled up like teams of hundreds of people to go and make this possible across the company in terms of like engineering systems, right? And that goes hand in hand with all the open source stuff that we've been driving, and that's part of changing that culture. But the other part of it is getting into the rewards and the motivations. Like when you go into your manager and you tell your manager, yeah, I did all this stuff for these open source projects, and I used this stuff over here, and if they're looking at you with this big question mark over their head and saying, like, what the heck am I paying you for? That's not a good feeling for anybody, right? So you need to get this as part of your reward system, part of the conversation you have with your peers, with your managers, with your collaborating teams. And so one of the things that we've done in the company, for example, is you get periodically asked to give peer feedback. So you get a thing in the mail, it's a questionnaire, and says, tell me about Jeff. And there are three questions on the question on that form. One of them is, how am I empowering others? The other is, how am I building on things that other people have done? And then the other is, what's been my impact? Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but that's the three. So 2 out of the 3 questions are about collaboration. Right? This is a fundamental thing because now you get hit with this. I'm being assessed by my peers by how well I collaborate with them. That's super powerful, right, in terms of changing a culture and driving that change. And the other thing that we did was say that open source is a core competency of a development team, of a development individuals. We have these documents that describe, core competencies and skill sets, and open source engagement, open source use, open source awareness is one of those core competencies. So it's there as part of what you're supposed to be doing. One of the things that comes, so you can do top down, you can try to manage the reward system. The other thing you have to manage is fear. There's a lot of fear in this space, and I talked a little bit about the middle managers, but the oldest emotion for humans is fear, and fear of the unknown is the worst one. And there's a lot of unknowns. I went through, there's that big list of policies, there's lots of risks and challenges. You have to talk to people, and that's bad for a lot of devs. And you have to look also at the different personas that are there. So developers fear losing value. If we've been trained all of our time that your value is in how many lines of code you wrote, or what function you implemented, or bugs fixed or whatever, and then we come and tell you, yeah, don't do any of that stuff, go use that library over there that somebody else wrote. You're like, oh, geez, well now anybody can do my job. No, you can just do more, right? You can just achieve more and deliver more by collaborating with others. Managers, I mentioned a little bit about the frozen middle, but they fear losing the control. Like their devs are going to go off and do stuff that they don't really control, or they're going to be dependent on a community that doesn't work for them, right? So now I'm going to ask somebody to fix a bug and hope they do it, right? Those are bad words for managers. I'm going to ask, not tell, right? And I'm going to hope, not demand, right? These are bad things for managers often. So, helping folks get over that. And then the executives, they fear like all the business challenges, losing IP, security bugs, getting sued by people, having people who work for them do something goofy in the public sphere and bad press, right? All those sorts of things. So recognizing that there are those fears and addressing them is sort of one of the key things to making the culture change successful. I had a couple of closing remarks. Just, words of encouragement. It is a big effort. So start somewhere and iterate. Really, that's what it's all about, is just starting, do, measure, learn, iterate. Just keep on going and do small things as you along the way. And this is like not an ending story. I've been doing this role for 4 years, and we're really just starting still, right? Like this is a big thing. And don't be daunted by it. Just do it, bite off one chunk at a time and chew as much as you can. And then, tools will get you some early things, right? There's some early gains, and building better tools will give you more interaction and collaboration early, but ultimately you've got to do that culture change. And that's it. I do have a bunch of reference material at the end with some open source tools that we use, some sites that are interesting, and more detail on the maturity model should you find that interesting, and that'll be posted wherever Guillaume tells me to put it. So that's it. Thank you, and I don't know if we're doing questions or not. Or
we're running a bit short on time.
That's fine. I'll be around.
But yes, exactly. Jeff is going to be around. So thank you so much for the presentation. And